but I will be able to understand your questions in the discussion period. So forgive me if I speak in English. Giulia Rossetto will continue in Italian. The southern Sinai is considered by many as a sacred landscape where God has revealed himself. The towering mountaintop of Jebel Musa, where, according to a tradition, Moses received the Ten Commandments, occupies everything, and in the valley below, there is the burning bush from which Moses heard the voice of God. In both locations, a mosque now stands next to a church, indicating that these places are special to Christians and Muslims alike. Once Christianity had gained a foothold in the early Byzantine Empire, in the 4th and 5th centuries, monastic settlements in the form of scattered hermitages sprang up throughout Egypt, including the Sinai, and the area became a destination for pilgrims who wanted to walk in the footsteps of the scriptures and who desired to catch a glimpse of the monastic experience, most prominent among them, of course, the famous noblewoman Egeria. In order to protect the military and trade routes from Aqaba to Suez, the Emperor Justinian included the southern Sinai in its vision of a global empire whose influence extended from the southern coast of Spain to the Caucasus and from the Balkans to Ethiopia. Between 548 and 565, a large three-aisled basilica was erected that carries the monograms of the emperor and of the late Empress Theodora, as well as the inscription of the builder, Stephen of Ayla. The church was lavishly decorated with a mosaic of the Transfiguration of Christ in the apse, which has now been restored thanks to its original splendor, thanks to the work of Italian experts. And that was a multi-year experience. It's only since the 12th century that the monastery is dedicated to the memory of Saint Catherine, who was martyred in Alexandria partly because she was a very learned woman. Throughout the centuries, under the Byzantine Empire and after the Arab conquests of the 7th century, and under Abbasid, Fatimid, Ayyubid, Mamluk, and Ottoman rulers, and currently under the political authority of the Arab Republic of Egypt, and in close ecclesiastical relation to the Patriarch of Jerusalem, St. Catherine's Monastery has been a point of convergence for different peoples, cultures, and languages. To any visitor, whether now or in the past, the monastery appears like a treasure trove of buildings, icons, and books. The over 2,000 icons, and there's no detailed record that exists even to the present day, include the earliest surviving masterpieces of that art, created in encaustic, that is, hot wax technique. As a collection, they offer to the scholar a representative cross-section of Byzantine icons across the ages. And this is something that Kurt Weizmann noted on his expedition to the Sinai. The library, and this is now a recent resource where the American expeditions, the materials, the manuscripts, and the photographs are now accessible. Okay, go on back. The library belongs to the exclusive group of the oldest libraries of the world that continue to exist today, at least that we know of in the West. It was founded in the 6th century, but book possession is attested even earlier at the site. It is the second oldest after the Biblioteca Capitolare di Verona that was founded in the 3rd or 4th century, and subsequently followed in date by the Stiftsbibliothek St. Gallen and the Stiftsbibliothek St. Peter in Salzburg in the late 7th century. The richness of its holdings extends across the centuries and represents the most important languages of medieval Christendom. It contains well over 4,500 manuscripts and a significant number of early printed books. Most of the manuscripts at St. Catherine's are in Greek, but also in 10 further languages. The second largest language group is, not surprisingly, considering the long history of the monastery, Arabic. This is a consequence of the Arab conquests of the Levant. Beginning with the 7th century, the Christians of Egypt, Palestine, and Syria began to communicate in Arabic. For a while, Greek remained the language of the liturgy, as can be seen from the many liturgical texts in the region that were predominantly produced in Arabic or translated from Greek. The study of Christian texts in Arabic, either by Melkite communities in unity with Constantinople or non-Chalcedonian Christians, is one of the new emerging fields of study in recent years, and the rich library holdings of Saint Catherine's provide a major source for such research. Syriac, with its variant Christian Palestinian Aramaic, was, along with Greek and Latin, one of the three most important languages in early medieval Christianity, and it is also the third largest language represented in the Sinai materials. It was used by Christians from the Mediterranean all the way to South India and to eastern China. In addition to liturgical books, there are many important works by theologians written in Syriac that are preserved in the Sinai. There's also an extensive collection of manuscripts in Georgian, second only to the National Library in Tbilisi and the Monastery of the Iberians on Mount Athos. Many of them were copied in the 10th and 11th century in Jerusalem or in the Sinai, and I'll come back to the Georgian manuscripts in a moment. Most of the manuscripts reflect the needs and interests of the generations of monks who called the monastery their home. Scriptures, liturgical texts, but also writings of the Church Fathers and other texts of spiritual value. The highlights in the library collection include an early copy of John Climacus's Ladder of Divine Ascent, copied close to the author's lifetime in the 7th century, an illustrated copy of Cosmas Indicopleustes' description of his travels to India, as well as the homilies of Gregory of Nazianzus, created in Constantinople in the 11th century and later brought to the Sinai from its dependence in Crete. The monastery also houses precious evidence for liturgical texts. The earliest liturgical text of the Slavonic tradition in Glagolitic script, the precursor of Cyrillic writing, and early Christian texts in Arabic. Perhaps best known is the Codex Sinaiticus, a manuscript that was originally in the Sinai but now is in the British Library in London, where it has reached through a long detour. Copied in a beautiful regular majuscule hand in the last decades of the 4th century, possibly in Alexandria, only a generation or two after the Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity as the new religion of the Roman Empire, it contains the oldest surviving versions of the 4 Gospels in Greek. How did all these manuscripts reach the monastery? We know that a certain amount of manuscripts was copied at the monastery, but that is not enough to speak of a scriptorium. What I'm showing you here is a comparison of it's not easy to see, but the line with the arrow is the most important one. The frequency of subscriptions, where the scribes note the place of copying, in Greek, comparing that with Syriac and Georgian, and setting it in relation to the total number of manuscripts in each of these languages that survives. What I would like to emphasize by showing this is, first of all, that if you look at the percentage, you will see that the Georgian manuscripts have a very high incidence of leaving colophons, and the percentage of colophons that mention, of existing colophons, of those that mention copying in the Sinai, is 18% for the Greek collection, 18, compared to 87 for Georgian and 49% for the Syriac. So on the basis of this, it is very questionable to speak about a Sinai scriptorium. Okay, is that better? Thank you. Many, probably most of the manuscripts were brought by pilgrims and given as gifts. Georgian manuscripts now in the monastery's possession were produced in the Holy Land, either in Jerusalem or at the Monastery of Saint Sabas. Greek manuscripts came from southern Italy, Palestine, Constantinople or Asia Minor, or from the monastery's dependencies in Crete and Cyprus. The contents of most of these manuscripts is predictable and repetitive, liturgical, scriptural, edifying monastic texts. Their presence in the multiple languages of the medieval Christian world bears witness to the visitors' desire to leave in the monastery a tangible token of their presence and an expression of gratitude to the hospitality of the monks. I mentioned in the beginning that St. Catherine's belongs amongst the oldest libraries that are still in existence. Library, however, may be an exaggeration when we speak to the period before the 18th century. It was only in 1734 that a specially dedicated library was constructed on the south side of the Justinianic rampart. Before that, the liturgical books were probably kept in the sacristy of the church, while other books would have been read by the monks in their cells, and I refer you to Giulia Rossetto's work on the history of the library. Today, the manuscripts and valuable early printed books are housed in the recently refurbished south wing of the monastery. A sensational find was made known in 1975, when along the northern wall, a room filled with debris and firewood was cleaned out 4 years after a fire in St. George's Chapel. And that is the new finds. The room had been used as a depository for manuscripts that were no longer in use, perhaps due to their deteriorated condition. As a result of this discovery of the new finds, you see here Archbishop Damianos with the manuscripts, and he is still in office. The library holdings, especially in the languages of Oriental Christianity, were increased by more than 30%. There were some 1,100 manuscripts, parts of manuscripts and fragments, including 836 manuscripts in Greek, often of early date and thus preserving precious evidence of different styles of majuscule writing, but also in Arabic, Syriac, Old Church Slavonic, and a surprisingly large number of codices in Georgian and items in Latin. The new finds basically contain those manuscripts that had been made for frequent use, were subsequently worn out, or were no longer deemed relevant, so that they had waited out their existence in the long-forgotten room for manuscript discards. They rarely contain entire texts, and their binding is usually in poor shape. Often they're only gatherings or individual sheets of parchment. In keeping with their utilitarian character, the new finds manuscripts also contain a very high percentage of palimpsest materials. And this will be the focus of the remarks that follow. I'll give a brief introduction into the study of palimpsests, and then Dr. Giulia Rossetto will present some of the highlights that have come to light in our recent research. Palimpsests are basically, as the Greek roots of the word indicates, reused sheets of written parchment. Palin means again, and psao means to scrape, so they're scraped a second time because originally the parchment is scraped to prepare for the first application of script, and then it is rescraped for the second application of script. Beginning with about the 4th century of the Common Era, especially prepared animal skin became the common material used in the production of books in codex form. Several folded parchment sheets inserted one into another were stitched together to form a quire or gathering. The complete gatherings would then be bound between two covers to form a codex. At times and in areas where parchment became rare, earlier codices that were considered to be no longer of use or relevance were taken apart. The original writing on the parchment folios, and that is what we now call the undertext, was removed and new writing was applied in the overtext. What makes palimpsests so exciting is that their undertext may contain new languages, new scripts, and new texts. But it requires the archaeology of the page to gain a good reading of the erased undertext, something that the bare eye cannot achieve. The monastery's library is not only among the oldest in continuous existence, as I mentioned earlier, it is also distinguished by the fact that it holds an exceptionally large number of palimpsests. We are currently aware of 173 items, both from the old collection and especially from the new finds. This means that circa 3.7% of the entire collection are palimpsest, and that number is increasing as research on the collection and especially on the new finds progresses. Between 2011 and 2017, at the invitation of the Synaxis of the Holy Oath, this is examples of the preservation of palimpsest objects, just to explain to you why we talk about palimpsest objects and not palimpsest codices, because often they survive only in very fragmentary form. So between 2011 and 2017, at the invitation of the Synaxis of the Holy Monastery of Saint Catherine and His Eminence Archbishop Damianos, the Bishop of Sinai, Faran and Raitho, the Early Manuscripts Electronic Library, EMEL, conducted the Sinai Palimpsest Project, which is the focus of my remaining time, and you can look up their work, our work on this website. The work was undertaken under the directorship of Michael Phelps, with myself as scholarly director, while Giulia Rossetto, at that time a doctoral student, contributed as an assistant. And I want to acknowledge that Dr. Damianos Kaisotakis is also here. He's the chief of imaging of EMEL, and the project was financially supported by the Arcadia Fund of London. Our work advances in 5 steps. Before any manuscript is imaged, Father Justin, the librarian, who studied classics at the University of Texas, evaluates whether it is safe to handle. Then follows a detailed codicological analysis to establish the conjoints, how each recto and each verso connect. This is essential for reconstructing the sequence of erased undertext, which sometimes extends across 2 pages and is not otherwise reconstructible when you look at digital images. The second step is image capture, and there you see Father Justin in the makeshift imaging room. We have now moved the equipment to specially dedicated facilities within the monastery after the library was redone. Each recto and each verso is imaged 33 times, which is very high quality imaging. By comparison, the Archimedes Palimpsest project produced 16 images per folio, with different wavelengths of light applied from different angles. I will show you. Damianos Kaisotakis at work. And here's just one example of how the imaging works and the results it achieves. And there's various other imaging techniques that are being used. The next step is image processing. The digital images, the 33 digital images, are stacked in a digital cube for computer-based and later also manual image processing. This involves analyzing individual captured images and combining data from multiple captured images in order to generate derivative images which maximize the legibility of the erased texts. In the 4th step, and you see examples of the different techniques here, and you will see more in Giulia Rossetto's presentation. In the 4th step, an international team of more than 20 experts in the different languages represented in the palimpsests has created catalog descriptions for the erased undertexts, analyzing the scripts and identifying the texts. The resulting digital library of Sinai palimpsests is hosted online on behalf of the monastery at the University of California, Los Angeles. Because we are dealing with a large collection of palimpsest manuscripts that has accumulated over time in the same location, one of the long-term results of our study will be insights into the process of making and using palimpsests that the study of individual manuscripts cannot yield. So what we know so far is that the recycling of older palimpsest material started quite early, in the 9th and 10th century, and continued into the 12th century and beyond. Erasure was accomplished by scraping the parchment with a blade or a pumice stone, or washing it off, or a combination of both. One thing is clear: As I said earlier, there's no real scriptorium at the Sinai, so we should also not assume that a medieval monk went to the bookshelves of the monastery, randomly selected a manuscript, erased it, and then applied a new text. This may have been the case in some locations. There are some indications that this may have been the case in Constantinople in the late Middle Ages, but it does not apply for the Sinai. It cannot be emphasized enough that it is not possible to reconstruct the contents of the Sinai library based on the erased sheets used in the manuscripts that it now possesses. Because, as I said, the manuscripts it now possesses frequently come from elsewhere. Instead, there is mounting evidence that palimpsest sheets, that is recycled second grade and second-hand parchment, used in manuscripts that over the centuries came to the Sinai, had their origin elsewhere. Indeed, there is good evidence when you compare other kinds of palimpsest depositories in the Jewish and the Muslim traditions to suggest that palimpsested sheets were traded, commercially produced and traded, because the Muslims and the Jews use Christian erased texts, and you cannot assume that they had those on their bookshelves. These are the results of our work. We have imaged 74 of the 173 currently known palimpsest objects in the library. That amounts to 6,800 palimpsested fronts and backs, rectos and versos. Considering that we take images with multispectral imaging, 33 images per recto per verso, we ended up with 85,000 digital images. And through the work of the scholars, 300 plus textual units were identified. One of the results I've said that were brought to light were not just new texts, but also new languages. This is the use of. We'll see more of that later. One of the new languages that is only known from palimpsests in the Sinai, and that was discovered already in the late 90s before our project, is the presence of a language spoken in the Caucasus, Caucasian Albanian. And our project has contributed to making these texts better legible. And another language that is mostly known from palimpsest, and we have increased the corpus by about 30%, is Christian Palestinian Aramaic, which was used as a liturgical language in the Levant until the 13th century. And with that, you must be curious to hear more about the erased texts that were discovered in the project, and for that I hand over to Giulia Rossetto. Thank you very much.